1840 prohibition on land purchases. Hobson travelled first to New South Wales, to confer with his new superior, Governor Gipps. As Hobson left Sydney on 18 January 1840, Gipps, relying on his authority over British subjects at least, proclaimed a prohibition on any further private land purchases from Maori, and that no existing claims would be recognized until they had been investigated by the authorities. Hobson repeated the proclamation in the Bay of Islands on 30 January 1840, soon after his arrival there. William Colenso of the Church Missionary Society printed both proclamations for Hobson, as he was the only printer at the Bay. 1840 Treaty of Waitangi signed. As soon as Hobson arrived at the Bay of Islands, he met with Busby on the Herald, and Busby organized an invitation to the chiefs of the Confederation, which had not actually met before, to meet Hobson, a Rangatira chief from the Queen of England. The meeting was to take place on Wednesday, 5 February. Meanwhile, a draft of the treaty was prepared in English, and a copy of this text was provided to Henry Williams, so that he could translate it for the meeting. At the meeting, the text, in both languages, was discussed before about 500 Maori and 200 Ke. Most of the speakers were suspicious of what was intended, but the speech of Tamati Wakanin is thought to have swayed the chiefs towards acceptance. Hobson expected several days of discussion and lobbying by those in favor and those opposed, and discussion did continue overnight at what is now Te Tai Mary. On the following day, 6 February, the meeting was hurriedly reassembled, the text read again, and signing commenced with Hon Waremuhin Pakai, Hon Heek, one of the signatories to the 1835 declaration. Some 40 chiefs signed on the first day. The Herald fired a 21-gun salute to mark the occasion. By September, more than 500 chiefs in different parts of the country had signed, including more than 5 women. Almost all of the chiefs signed copies of the Maori text of the treaty. A number of districts were not approached, and some notable chiefs refused to sign. For example, Tiuhu from Ngtaitoa, located around Taup 6, refused to consent to the mana of a woman, the Queen, resting on these islands. 1840 May sovereignty proclaimed over New Zealand in early March. While heading down the eastern coast to obtain further signatories for the treaty, Hobson suffered a paralytic stroke, and so he deputized a number of men, including 7 missionaries, to collect more signatures from around the country on copies of the treaty. Hobson wished to have signatures from the Cook Strait area, particularly that of Te Rauparaha, and so Henry Williams was dispatched to get these, while other copies were sent to the Bay of Plenty, Waikato, Tauranga, and Kaidea. Major Bunbury, on the Herald, was sent to get signatures from the South Island, Stewart Island and Hawke's Bay. On 21 May, while this was still underway, Hobson proclaimed sovereignty over all of New Zealand. Over the North Island on the basis of cession by the treaty, and the Southern Islands by right of discovery. Some historians suggest that he wanted to declare the Crown's authority over the whole country, because he had learned of possible moves by the New Zealand Company to set up its own administration around Cook Strait. His second-in-command, Major Bunbury, also made proclamations of sovereignty over Stewart Island by right of discovery on 5 June, as no Maori could be found to sign the treaty, and over the South Island on 17 June by virtue of cession. 1841 Chief Protector of Aborigines appointed in April 1840. While he was recuperating at Waimate, Hobson approached the CMSLA missionary George Clark, to take the position of Protector of Aborigines, initially a temporary position, which he accepted. When the new colony was established in 1841, Clark filled the position as Chief Protector of Aborigines. Clark and his staff were also given a second, conflicting, role as land purchasers for the Crown. Hobson was recorded in April 1840 as saying to Clark, "It may be necessary to appraise you that, in the discharge of your duties, you may be called upon to make journeys into the interior, and to negotiate the purchase of lands from the natives." Although Clark managed to persuade the governor to free him of the land purchasing responsibilities, which clearly conflicted with his protective role, his sub-protectors still retained their dual roles. Several sub-protectors worked actively for Maori interests, most prominently the very young George Clark Jr., who was an advocate for Maori before William Spain's Land Claims Commission, and who investigated the Wairau incident. In 1846, Governor George Grey, suspicious of anyone else who exercised influence over Maori, especially missionaries, disbanded the Native Protectorate, and appointed a Native Secretary to implement his instructions. 1842 Commission investigates early land purchases following Lord Normanby's instructions, and as proclaimed by Governor Gibson Sidney and Hobson, when he arrived in New Zealand. 3 Land Claims Commissioners, M. Richmond, E. L. Godfrey and W. Spain, were appointed to investigate all pre-treaty land purchases made by Europeans. If the commissioners concluded that a purchase was made in good faith, they could validate it and award a Crown grant limited to 2560 acres, 4 square miles. If the purchase was invalid, or exceeded that size, the excess land in question was not returned to the original Maori owners, but became Crown land. 1 Land Claims Commissioner, English lawyer William Spain, was appointed especially to investigate the huge purchases claimed by the New Zealand Company. Over several years, Spain determined that most of the New Zealand Company purchases in Wellington and elsewhere were invalid, but not all his recommendations were acted upon. There was subsequently a shift from investigating the validity of the company's land claims to arbitrating agreements with Maori, to allow settlement in Wellington to go ahead. 1842 Maori deemed under Crown authority. In 1842, a long-standing struggle between the Maori of Hauraki and Tauranga broke out in a fresh wave of violence. The government could do little about it, and the Attorney-General advanced the argument that the chiefs who had not signed the treaty, as was the case with Terea, one of the leaders in the fighting, were perhaps not bound by the Crown's authority anyway. This argument was immediately rejected in London. Since Hobson's declaration of the Queen's sovereignty in May 1840, or at least since his proclamation was gazetted in London in October 1840, all of New Zealand and all of its inhabitants were considered to be under British sovereignty. This did not mean, however, that British law had to be imposed immediately upon Maori. Some matters, such as warfare, cannibalism and slavery, were supposed to be suppressed as soon as practicable, but other customs could be left to the influence of missionaries and increasing contact with white settlement. 1843 The Wairau incident. The settlers in the New Zealand Company town of Nelson were keen to expand their lands into the Wairau Valley, ahead of the Land Commissioner's inquiry into the area. The local Maori, particularly Ngāi rejected any claim that they had already sold that area to the company. One group, led by Te Raparaha and Te Rangihiata, disrupted a survey party and burned their huts. In response, a party led by local magistrate Thompson and company representative Captain Arthur Wakefield set out to arrest the chiefs. When they met at Tuamarina, Te Raparaha denied destroying anything that was not his own property. Thompson became enraged, and when he called his men forward a musket went off, killing Te Rangihiata's wife. In the ensuing battle, 22 Europeans were killed, including those who surrendered, in Utu, satisfaction, for the Maori deaths. The settlers were outraged, and there was widespread hysteria that Ngāi would attack elsewhere, especially in Wellington. But incoming Governor Robert Fitzroy took the view that the settler posse had brought it on themselves by foolish and provocative actions, and inflicted no punishment upon Ngāi.